Welcome, brothers and sisters, to Mormon Movie Reviews, where LDS movie lovers belong. My name is Davis, and today is September 22nd, 2022. This is episode 24, where we will be reviewing The Other Side of Heaven, released in 2001 with a running time of 113 minutes. This review works best if you've seen this film before, though that is not required, and a spoiler alert. Synopsis: when John Groberg is sent on a 3-year mission to Tonga, he has no idea what he's getting into. Not understanding the language and lonely for Jean, the girl he left behind, John faces many challenges while helping the people of Tonga. Now, this is based on a true story of the autobiography that was released in 1994 from John H. Groberg called In the Eye of the Storm. It's a first-person account which tells the fascinating story of the 3 years he spent on the islands in the South Pacific amidst a kindly people who had a deep faith in God, a faith that provides the backdrop for Elder Groberg's account of miraculous healings, protective warnings, and perilous voyages. This film is brought to us by director Mitch Davis, who was inspired by the autobiography, and he wanted to tell the story on the silver screen. Deseret Book, who at the time was called Bookcraft, owned the rights to the story, and the company wanted to ensure that Davis captured the spirit of the book. So eventually a deal was struck, in which is why we have the film today. Now, Disney Studios is the one who picked up and produced and advertised and distributed The Other Side of Heaven, making this one of the only so-called Mormon cinematic films to have the complete blessing of a major studio label. Now, let's meet our actors here. We have Christopher Gorman, who plays the part of Elder Groberg, and he's mostly known for his TV roles, such as being on The Party of Five, Felicity, or Without a Trace, but he also has done some film work, including voiceovers of the Justice League series. Now, I found a clip of him in an interview talking about The Other Side of Heaven and his experience in making the film, which was released in 2019, which I think you will enjoy.
We shot the first The Other Side of Heaven film in 2000. So it's been 18 years, and it was a fantastic experience. It was like nothing I'd ever done before. I have 3 kids, so I really can relate to traveling somewhere with them for work. So a lot of this really hits home. A lot of this I can really relate to. I've met Elder Groberg on the last film, and I've met him on this film, and he sends me their family Christmas letter every year, so I'm always keeping up with the Grobergs. He's been a consistent presence, and I have a lot of respect for him and Jean.
Elder John Groberg, he became a general authority in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 1976. He went on to study at Brigham Young University, got an MBA from Indiana University, and he grew up in Idaho Falls. He eventually returned to Tonga later on in life to serve as a mission president. Now, here is Anne Hathaway. She plays the part of Jean. Boy, I didn't know she was a Latter-day Saint. Just kidding. Now, this was Anne Hathaway's first feature-length film. Her first big movie part was The Princess Diaries, which happened right after this. Now, The Other Side of Heaven was shot on location in Auckland, New Zealand, on the island of Rarotonga. It opens in Idaho, which we're seeing here in about 1950s, which is a typical Mormon community. Now, this dance scene in the opening is really hopping, and the parts, our leads here, they have some real chemistry here. We also get to see Elder Groberg leaving for his 3-year mission, and he receives a send-off from both of his parents, and his mom's message in particular, I thought, was pretty inappropriate.
I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. I love you, Mom.
Don't come home, son. Don't come home early.
His mother is sending him a negative message about not coming home early, which is a sentiment that I have a real particular issue with. It's all too common, unfortunately. Now, this film, it straddles the line between documentary and drama. In fact, it takes Elder Groberg almost 2 months just to get to Tonga. So it's showing some of the struggles with which, he had to go to different islands and get voyages. It was a real challenge back in the 1950s. Now, eventually, he's assigned to a native Tongan missionary companion who's named Feki, who's played by Joe Falau, who's really authentic and believable in his role as a native Latter-day Saint on the island. And their companionship is one of the film's strongest points. Naturally, Elder Groberg, though, he struggles to learn the language, as you might imagine. So I queued up a funny scene here, which is where he is working on speaking in Tongan.
Oe tokotaha kotoape ia te kimo tolu ke mo hoko koe fale kau kau.
He just doesn't stick to one island here. He travels all over Tonga. Now, there's some Christian colonialism inherent in his missionary efforts, as well as his desire to help natives who Groberg obviously believes need his ignorant 19-year-old Idaho white kid ideals to help them abandon their rich cultural heritage in favor of the restored gospel. One of the funniest and most memorable scenes when I watched the film back in 2001 occurs between Groberg and the village hottie. And this wasn't something that happened to me when I was a missionary.
I hurt my ankle.
Oh boy.
Elder Groberg's relationship between the local minister on the left here is also very well done. There's a friction which would be understandable, and even though there's not ultimate reconciliation, there's peace and respect. Now, the missionaries, they also encounter some colorful characters along the way. The film tries, but ultimately fails to avoid stereotyping indigenous peoples, because remember, when it's all said and done, this is a faith-promoting story at its core. Some of my favorite scenes take place between John Groberg and Jean in the exchanging of the letters back and forth with one another, as recorded in his book and memoir. Although the film does rely on the stereotypical good Mormon missionary boy and his faithful girl who's waiting for him back home, the film does capture the angst of being away from home as a missionary really well. In the middle of the movie, we have a hurricane which takes place and devastates the islands, and the aftermath dominates the second half of the film. At one point, Elder Groberg, he's even in a perilous condition from the lack of food after the hurricane destroys much of the island's resources and supplies. Eventually, though, they are rescued, which brings us to the conclusion of his missionary service on the island. One of the most touching scenes is when he says goodbye to the people with whom he's been laboring with for these last 3 years. And they naturally return the favor to him, singing "God Be With You Till We Meet Again," which is a hallowed Mormon anthem. Now, naturally, John, he is welcomed back as the hero in Idaho because he did not come home early. The message that we're being sent is if you go on a mission, do your best, and come home with honor, then you get to marry a beautiful girl, and everyone will live happily ever after. That's not always the case for everyone, of course. Now, looking at the reviews, if you go over to Rotten Tomatoes and check out the reviews of the film, it's 30% on the tomato meter and 74% audience score. That's nothing to brag about. I think one of the best reviews that I saw on Rotten Tomatoes was from Carol Kling, who said that the film was painfully earnest but painfully dull. Now, despite the lackluster box office earnings and some mediocre reviews, Gorham, he eventually reprised his role for the film in The Other Side of Heaven 2, Fire of Faith. And this was released in 2019 and is a drama that's about 2 hours long. Now, this film is available on YouTube for streaming, and I think that this YouTube comment, which is at the bottom of it, pretty much sums up the entire movie, where Princess Sheena Moore says, "I love this movie because I'm a Mormon, including me and my family." Now, seeing through the modern lens, or presentism, if you will, The Other Side of Heaven brings us a strange cocktail of white national colonialism and imposed religion on so-called uncivilized peoples. Now, the professor of literature at Brigham Young University, Terrell Givens, noted Mormon author, he says that the film doesn't mention Groberg's faith. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it's not even mentioned. In fact, the word Mormon maybe only appears once in the film. And that faith never explains what his rationale is for going on a mission. Why is he there? Now, Givens, he speculates that this could be in an effort to, quote, universalize the message of Christian service and the spiritual coming of age, end quote. And there's basically no distinctly Mormon elements in the film. There's no name tags, and that's all done in an effort to give it more mass appeal and make it more popular. Now, this film, it has the second highest budget of any Mormon movie in history, and it was the largest at the time in 2001. It still has the largest budget of any non-church-backed cinematic endeavor, but it failed to recoup its budget. The budget was $7 million, and it only recouped $5 million in earnings, so it was a loss. So it's no wonder that we haven't seen another major studio enter this genre since this film's release in 2001. If your max earning for a Mormon film is $5 million, most people are not going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Now, thank you so much for joining me to review this film. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. And join us next time for another episode of the Mormon Movie Reviews, where LDS movie lovers belong. So long.